Jim Clarke here at the Synchronicity Sanctuary in Central Virginia to share another contemplative focus with you. So the focus I want to share with you today is simply pure authentic being is the ultimate intimacy. As we evolve our human experience beyond the confines of duality, and we approach the experience of unified consciousness, there is no other, and yet we are still watching. The personality yields to unity. There is only one. So that's the contemplative focus. It's about human experience and the natural evolution of our awareness of who we are and what life is, from separation and individuality and personality as the dominant experience as a human being, to the realization of being the consciousness that is all and everything, where all separation is gone, and yet somehow we're still watching and witnessing, even though we're still in a human form, because the human form is also the same consciousness. So it simply allows the realization and the viewing, if you will, of a form, but not separate from consciousness itself. So it's simply the ultimate intimacy where all and everything is all and everything, and there is no separation. There is only one. And that is a progressive evolutionary process that is happening with every individual on the planet today and always has been. It begins with an involutionary cycle wherein we are dominated by the objective polarity, the polarity of contraction and separation. And in this, we are an individual, and we have an identification as an individual separate from all other individuals in our world, and how that unfolds in terms of our experience of ourselves in relation to that situation where we are alone, so to speak. And as we progress life after life, having experiences, usually not very good ones, as a separate individual, struggling to survive, struggling to belong, struggling for some kind of fulfillment or something better than the suffering that comes from separation, and never being quite fulfilled in our endeavors to do so until we've had enough of this experience that we evolve beyond it. We finally get what we call fulfilled in the attempt to be a separate individual, separate from consciousness. It's like, you might say it's a creation game. It's a game where consciousness pretends to be what it is not, in the form of an individual such as me or you, and we attempt to be that person, and we attempt to evolve and let's say become more aware in some way or another. And we do this very basically in the beginning of the evolutionary cycle, which is basically just a survival game. And then gradually we evolve ourselves to reaching towards something bigger, something what we would call spiritual. And when we reach that point, we're crossing the bridge into the evolutionary cycle. And this is usually where a teacher will show up in your life. Somehow, somewhere, they will show up to help guide you in your process, because you will have, sometimes you'll have an awakening experience, a peak experience where you get a glimpse of the big picture and something that's elevating and awe-inspiring and changes your life dramatically, because your perspective totally gets shifted. Although you're still dominated by the experience of being an individual, now you have to incorporate or the information that you got from that experience and the experiences that unfold therein as you begin to meditate and you explore various lifestyles that support a greater awareness of yourself and life. And as this unfolds in your life, there will be many, many challenges because you, at least in my case, you get a taste of awakening, but then you have to bring that into yourself and substantiate that experience. And that is sometimes and usually a very long and process that's also very intense at times too, because you're working with an identity that you've built up as an individual. You have a name, you have a personality, you have all these things that you've collected and you're identified with on the one hand. On the other hand, there's been some amount of illumination in your experience where all of that seemed to be either non-existent or irrelevant. And so what do you do with that? So you start to live as best you can as an explorer of what is real. I mean, your experience tells you that your personality is not the ultimate reality of you, and yet you're there. So there's quite a conundrum. And in my own experience, I know that my life was turned upside down for many years, although it was also enhanced at the same time. So I started to meditate. I started to live a holistic lifestyle. I changed my diet. I started to exercise. I did everything I could to support. At that time, it was to support the efforts to get that experience back again. I wanted to have that experience all the time because it was so great, so beautiful, and so expansive and loving and everything. And I was pretty much blissed out for quite a while after that. And as that seemingly started to fade, my drive to get it back, shall we say, was what kept pushing me forward, even though it was a misconception that somehow it had left. It was simply my ego coming back into play through desire and through the belief that I was, shall we say, awakened in one moment and then back into being in a non-wakeful state, which was not really true, but it was what my mind created. And so as I journeyed this experience, I kept looking at different ways to meditate, trying to find one that was more effective in terms of getting that experience back again. And through that process, I did explore different ways to meditate, different traditional meditation systems. I found some systems more effective for me than others. And then I ultimately found the synchronicity high-tech meditation, which was my biggest breakthrough, because once I discovered that, I also discovered my teacher at the same time, without even realizing it. And I started to use the meditation technology from synchronicity, and my meditations were immediately much improved. They were deeper. They were impactful every time, not just hit and miss, which is what I experienced most of the time with traditional systems. And then my process got deeper and more intense as well, because I was getting more peak experiences that were telling me something about I am more than what I think. And I had to integrate all this, and I didn't understand it at first. But here, I had someone to speak to, a guide, a coach, if you will, that could kind of explain the process I was experiencing, where you get new information exponentially through meditation, and that goes into you. And then once you have that information, the old data that you still hold on to that's in conflict with that experience has to go. And so you get into a clearing process, what we call the fivefold process here, where you get the peak experience, you evolve yourself a little bit more, and then you have to get rid of the incongruent data that you're still hanging on to, because it just can't stay as part of you anymore, because it's been replaced by an experience that went beyond what that data supported. It's that simple. It's like upgrading the software of your own being. And as you get into this process, your experience in the human experience, in a polarized reality, which is what we have to have experience, the dominant polarities begin to shift more and more and more. Whereas when you're totally identified with the flesh and blood body as a human being, and separation is your dominant experience, and you're limited to just being a personality, a human being, and then you go beyond that, then you gradually keep going beyond that as far as you can to incorporate the truth of who you are. And by that we simply mean the essence of your very existence, the essence of who you are and what everything is. And so you'd start to develop more of what we call a witnessing awareness, where you see yourself as you always have been, in terms of you're still in the body, you still have all the identifications that you had before, but they don't hold you. It's not your limit. You've been beyond that, and you keep pushing to go farther and farther towards whatever that's leading, but you don't really know quite what that might be yet. And it's a process, and it's a process that's demanding. It's probably one of the most difficult processes a human being can take on, because you're functioning on the one hand as a human being, on the other hand you're exploring territory that goes far beyond merely being a human being. And incorporating this in a fashion where you can still be functional in the world, and also to be truthful with yourself and with all those in your world, that is a very difficult process. Because I know in my case, when I was first beginning the journey, my family didn't understand, of course. I couldn't really share that with them because their background and their experience was so far removed from mine that to close that gap was just not going to happen. And so I had to live with that and do my best to maintain my relationship with my family, but on the one hand, and then pursue my meditation lifestyle on the other hand. And as this kept evolving, my experience as source, my experience as being consciousness, kept coming to me in bits and pieces that were so powerful and so uplifting that there was no way I was going to stop this process at all. Even though I was challenged by it, I knew I had found what I was looking for, simply because every time I had such an experience, I felt so fulfilled and so loving and so complete that told me more than all the books in the world could ever say. You know, that's the kind of information that's direct experience within yourself, and it's undeniable. So when you have that kind of a progressive process happening, there's going to be conflicts, or apparent conflicts, within yourself about how you relate to people that you already know, how you relate to the world in general, how do you function in the world. And in my case, the functioning in the world was simply just what it always has been. You have to have a job, you have to make money, you have to live, right? And in this culture, that meant having a job and having a place to live and maintaining that kind of a basic, fundamental way of living and surviving on the one hand, and then being a meditator on the other, and making more and more time for that practice. So when the invitation came to me to come to Synchronicity and maybe entertain the idea of living here, where the whole structure was a meditative lifestyle, so you didn't have to make time for it, it was built in. When that opportunity came, the resistance that I would have had, say, earlier in life to that choice wasn't nearly strong enough to keep me away from the opportunity that it gave me. And when I said yes to that, my evolutionary process was accelerated by 100-fold in terms of what I had experienced for all the years I meditated prior to this time. So it's like an acceleration. You start with an involutionary process, and you go through lifetimes of being an individual living with the experience of separation, and in this you suffer because you're not complete and you're not being true to yourself, but you don't even know this. And so you're trying to make something work that will never work, because it's being who you are not, really. And then when you finally get fulfilled in that, when you finally get ready to journey towards getting back to the truth of who you are, and your teacher, he, she, or it, whatever shows up for you to guide you and take you further into this journey, that shows up at that point, so that you can, as we used to call it, we said, crossing the bridge, going from the involutionary cycle to the evolutionary cycle, where you get enough experience, truthful experience, of the essence of who you are and what life is. And from that point on, your journey is going in that direction. So if you have to come back again, it's going to be as a meditator. It's going to have something to do with living a contemplative focus that is concerned with your own evolutionary process. And so that's what I wanted to share with you today. It's been a journey and still continues to be a journey, and it's challenges, but then life always has challenges no matter what. Whether you're in the involutionary cycle or the evolutionary cycle, challenge is just one of the parts of living as a human being. And yet, being a human being is what allows us to have a conscious journey and to consciously experience going from being a limited, separate human being to the consciousness that is all and everything, and that is huge. And that is why the game goes on, because it is huge. And it's how it's a primary intention that's built into consciousness itself. It's our, shall we say, it's our motivation for being a human being, even though we're not aware of that as such. But that's what drives the whole show going on planet Earth. Irregardless of what people think is going on, that's what's really happening here. So that's what I wanted to share with you today, and I will be back again next week to share another contemplative focus with you. Until then, I thank you very much for watching, and I hope to see you here again.